Before we start, I want you to take a listen these 3 examples and pick the one that you like most. Compression in electric dance music is kind of an artistic approach, and if you pick anything else than number 1, you are probably also craving for that compressed sound. So how can we mix for loudness? Let's say we have this imaginary one-dimensional sound and we want to get it louder. The solution would have been pushing that up, and that will make it louder immediately. In the real world, sounds are not one-dimensional. They often look like this. In the x-axis, we would have this different frequency range from low end to high end, and on the y-axis, we would have the loudness level from quieter and louder. If we do the same trick over here and start to pull this sound up in the volume level, we will start to clip this signal because we already reached peak level in this frequency. So when you are mixing for the loudness, you have to consider not only the loudness level of each signal, but frequency response of the signal as well. Issue is the music is not static, so the frequency response and the loudness will change over time. So maybe in the first second we will see a loudness to frequency response, something like that, and then maybe it changes completely and then it changes again. So you have to think about the time domain of the signal when you're mixing for loudness. So when you are mixing for loudness, you can just think about these 3 steps. First, control your dynamics, then fill up your spectrum, and then fill up the space that is left over. Controlling the dynamics. Let's take a look at one final scheme that is really important. Let's say we have a blue element and a red element. The blue element is very dynamic but short, and the red element is long but very loud. So when you sum up your mix, resulting with this huge peak on the master channel, which you have to run into a limiter, and limiter will be just squashing these 2 together and making the sound very muddy and weird. But if you control your dynamics, this time when we come to the red element, we duck the volume really low when the blue starts and slowly increase the volume. And when we sum them together, we will see that the overall loudness really never crosses over the threshold, and we don't need to even limit the signal. If you are making electronic dance music, when your kick hits, it will really drive your track, and on beats will be the most crucial parts to control the dynamics. For example, take a look at here. That peak just happens due to the build up from sub bass and the kick itself. So you have to make sure that when the kick hits, you are ducking the sub bass. The second problem will be when the tom and the sub bass hits exactly the same time due to the exactly same problem. Listen here. For the tom sounds, you don't need to duck everything. Use something like multiband compression, so that you're only ducking the sub end area without with. So dynamics are a sum up game. So you get that 2 dB here, 3 dB there, and overall it really builds up together. Other way to control dynamics is limiting, compressing, or clipping the signal. A bass like this. You can see the dynamic range changes quite a bit. I like to use hard clippers because they introduce kind of analog warmth. Introduce this cool sizzle sound, and together on the low end, I think this is more than enough for low end, but if you want to exaggerate the effect, you can always add additional compression or limiting to your group. Glue compressor will help with the pumping, limiter will help you to cut any unnecessary peaks. Other parts that you have to control or dynamics are when the clap hits. Easiest way to solve this problem is actually adding a clipper to your snare so that it's not that transient. And then playing with the position of the snare so that it doesn't hit exactly the same moment that kick hits. Before, after. In this case, we can even bring down a bit more if we use something like an overdrive. Bring in more harmonics, but decrease down the dynamic range. You want to also add that low end kick groove on your sustained sounds, such as pads and ambience. And of course, be careful with your hats as well, especially for the off hats. I enjoy actually playing around with the envelopes oftentimes. You can bring this down instead, because already it's clipped, right? And final control will be your lead sounds, especially for this type of analog sounds. Lead tends to bounce around quite a bit. If you want this analog feel, you can still go for the clippers. Just controlling the dynamics. Look how all the loudness evened out in the track already. Filling the spectrum means that supporting this track with additional harmonics, really. The good idea is actually using distortions or saturations to push up the sound a bit further so that you have bigger sound. And the good thing with the distortions, they will actually help you control the dynamics because they tend to make the sounds fatter and evener and less transient. We did that already on our clap. The other example, for example, just using distortion on your lead sounds, that will help you really smooth out the transient while giving this extra juice in it. Another very common technique, parallel saturation and compression. I'm going to do it both at the same time. I like to do it this way, put a clipper first, and then I will send a couple of elements there. For example, let's say I want hats, a little bit ambience, this sound. Maybe I can have a little bit tones. Let's start with EQ so we don't get super lows. Clip it so that it really turns into a stationary sound. You don't get any transients here. I will still use a glue compression to get this pumping effect with the slow release. And make sure that you have sidechain compression to the kick, because that on beat, again, where everything clutters, there you can avoid having this parallel chain. You can even enjoy a bit extra distortion here. Now all you need to do to blend in at an amount that you enjoy. The final step is filling in the space. Now in our case here, because it's kind of a busy track, we don't really have much space left, unfortunately. Just to illustrate is when you feel like there are spaces left over and then you cannot fill that space with these extra things that we have done, you can now consider maybe, let's say we never had the 16 heads, right? It was something like this. Then that would have been a perfect opportunity to introduce, okay, we have to fill the highs. The best way to do that, actually introducing something like this. But this is really a super briefly explanation of mixing for the loudness. By the way, this was just a small piece from my mixing masterclass. If you want to really learn all about mixing, I will put the link below. Take a look at that.